Hey, Instagram Live, welcome. Just moving over here, closing the door. I like a slow news day. I like when there's not that much happening. The market's kind of flat. We already know all the bad news is already out. We already know the worst case. I mean, there are some they're always going to try to scare you. So last night I saw a headline, the world might be too hot to live in 2070. Are you kidding me? That's the same headline you gave me last year, the year before. We're bored of that now. We can't, unless we're all dying tomorrow, your headline is not good enough anymore. Like 2070, that's the good news if we all die in 2070. We've been getting headlines we're all going to die in 2 weeks for the past 3 months. So you can't scare us with the global warming headlines anymore. Not going to happen. And by the way, I don't know. Pollution's all down across the world. Will it come back? Maybe. I guess so. But it's pretty interesting how easily just the ozone layer got fixed. All the pollution's gone. So we know when the glaciers start melting, just quarantine for 6 weeks. Do lots of TikTok videos. Like the government should say, here's how stimulus should work when there's global warming. The government should say, everybody's going to get paid $5 per TikTok video for the next 8 weeks. Then no one will complain about the quarantine. We're just going to quarantine for fun just to do TikTok videos. And at the end of it, people will say, oh, did we just stay inside for 8 weeks without eating or showering or bathing? No problem. And then global warming will be over. That's how you trick people into quarantining when global warming becomes a big issue. So we're going to talk about the usual things, side hustles, writing, the news, trending news. It's interesting. I saw another piece of news this morning that really bothered me. I think it was in the New York Times. They say children under the age of 5 are coming down with this rare disease, Kawasaki disease. I don't even know what that disease is. And they suspect it might be related to coronavirus. And I'm like, oh no, this is the New York Times. Are kids under 5 getting these weird coronavirus conditions? I thought kids under 5 weren't affected at all. Well, turns out about 5,000 kids under 5 a year get Kawasaki disease anyway. And so this article didn't say anything at all about coronavirus other than it could be related to Kawasaki disease with kids under 5, could be related to coronavirus. They forgot to mention that 5,000 little kids a year die from Kawasaki disease. So this article was meaningless except to scare you because everyone always says, you know what, kids aren't going to get this. So the New York Times said, you know what, let's find some weird disease that no one's ever heard of. Let's link it to coronavirus even though there's zero evidence and people will click on this and get scared. Here's the thing. This strategy is only going to work for so long of scaring people because the advertisers are going away. I think all the major, even though content is king, all these media companies that just use bullshit to get people to click, nobody wants pure bullshit anymore. People do want semi-bullshit because here's the thing. If you believe in one set of ideas and you don't want to read a news source that is the opposite of those ideas. You like confirmation bias. You want to read Fox or MSNBC or something that agrees with you all the time. So I think there is some room for media services that agree with you all the time, but I prefer to have reliable information. I prefer to go directly to the source. I know what it's like in a newsroom. Those people know nothing. They're bitter, angry, greedy people, and they're just horrible journalists in general. Not everybody, but just at these extreme places. And then the worst are the places that just try to sensationalize. Like, oh no, children got Kawasaki disease because of coronavirus. Click. Oh, they don't say anything about coronavirus. I guess I clicked by mistake. But then you go out, oh no, everyone's going to die by 2070 because it's too hot. Click. Oh, but 2070, I'm more worried about tomorrow. Like, I don't know, I can't even predict the weather for this weekend. How do they know about the weather in 2070? So, and we all know all of these models are wrong. By the way, speaking of models, speaking of supermodels, and I'm actually speaking of coronavirus models, but the main models, remember the original models, and I say original like they're antiques, but 2 months ago, Imperial College in London came out with this mathematical model that said there could be 10 million deaths in the United States. And I kept thinking to myself, there's 94 deaths in South Korea, there's 0 deaths in Singapore at the time. Why would there, even in China, there wasn't millions of deaths in China. Even if they were lying, there still wasn't millions of deaths. How could there be 10 million deaths in the United States? The model seemed wrong. And we discussed it here on this IG Live. They were wrong. So Imperial College moved it down. But here's the interesting thing. Imperial College, those models have been all over the place. They've changed the numbers every 5 days. They were crazy. But we did shut down a 7 billion person economy. The whole world shut down because of these Imperial College models. Now, guess what? The professor, Neil Ferguson, who made these models, he just resigned from his job as a government advisor because he was the one, he kept going on TV every day in the UK and saying, you must social distance. Even if you and your wife were separated at the time of quarantine, you must stay quarantined and not see each other. So that's what he specifically said. Now it turns out he resigned yesterday from his job as a government advisor because this woman who was married to someone who might have had coronavirus has been visiting him all throughout the quarantine, doing their business, and then going back to her husband and child without them realizing what she'd been up to. So he totally was going against all the social distancing rules. So he violated, this person said it, what's your name? Positive Magic Scientist? He violated every rule that he was insisting on. And he got the UK to change their policy. He got the United States to change their policy. Now, I'm not saying the policy is doing anything right or wrong or whatever, but who knows? But, the fact that, and so I would post things like at the end of February, early March, and I would say, it seems kind of strange that this model would say 10 million deaths. How do you even get to that math? Like, I couldn't even figure out the math. And people would respond to me and say, oh, James, I think I'm going to trust the experts instead of you. Well, there's your expert. The number one guy in the planet who made all the most important models that led to all of public policy. I mean, the President of the United States, the Prime Minister of England, all over Europe, all these world leaders made their decisions originally off of this guy's models. And did he not believe his advice? Did he not think it was, this woman had a husband who maybe had coronavirus, maybe he had coronavirus, he could have spread it to her children? Sometimes I ask, what is going on? Like, is the world, it almost makes the world seem like a simulation that let's shut down let's create a pandemic, let's shut down the entire economy as like this weird experiment in a simulation. And then, you know what, just for fun, let's make the guy who predicted everything incorrectly, let's make him not even follow his own advice because of some sexual liaisons. By the way, this is interesting too. So hold on a second, I feel a little dehydrated. How did they find out about these liaisons? Like, I read the article was in the British newspaper, The Telegraph. I read the article, and this is where I start to turn conspiracy theorist. There's nothing wrong with being a conspiracy theorist. I actually admire quite a few conspiracy theorists. It's possible to go over the deep end and crazy like everything. But it's worth it to and I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I believe in mostly whatever. But it's worth it to practice being a conspiracy theorist. Always ask yourself, what's going on 1 level deep? 2 levels deep, 3 levels deep. It's similar to what I said the other day. There's always a good reason and a real reason. Oh, Josie, my daughter, you want to hang out at the library? Yeah, she says, yeah, I want to study, Daddy, I want to study hard. That's the good reason. Real reason, boys at the library, Can't argue with the good reason, but the real reason is the actual reason. So first we have to ask, Professor Ferguson, why did you advise everybody to not even husband and wife who were separated at the point of the lockdown, you weren't allowed to see each other for the entire quarantine. They still don't see each other. Why would you say that? And then meanwhile, you're going to meet up in these illicit liaisons with a married woman with kids, and could even spread coronavirus. But then there's one level deeper. Who was spying on Neil Ferguson to find this out? Like, I read the article in the Telegraph. They listed every date and time that she visited him. And then they even quoted her husband's friends saying, we think he might have coronavirus. Who is doing these investigations? Like, I could tell you for a fact it was not reporters, because reporters don't really do that kind of investigative journalism anymore. They're paid to just churn out 1,000 articles a week. So somebody must have been hired at a very high level to dig up dirt on this guy and then share it with a newspaper. And again, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, and I sent this to a friend of mine. I sent this to a friend of mine who is a conspiracy theorist and is a well-known one. And he wrote back and said, what's your gut tell you on this? And when I thought about it, my gut told me probably some big hedge fund manager wanted to discredit this guy, or maybe some government leader, like, someone said, look, we're taking all of our advice from this guy. Let's see if there's any skeletons in his closet. Definitely something weird happened, and we're never going to know the full story. Now, not most of the time, conspiracies don't work. Like, people who say, oh, the World Trade Center was bombed. It wasn't hit by planes. I actually saw with my I didn't see it on TV. I saw with my physical eyes the first plane go right into the World Trade Center. So I know that conspiracy is not true. But people were saying, oh, just from physics, the World Trade Center would topple over. No, that's not true, because all of the weight is in the first 50 floors. After that is less weight than the first 50 floors. So it makes sense that it doesn't tip over, and the power of the first 50 floors crumbling just goes straight down. It makes everything go straight down. So all those conspiracy theories about 9/11 are almost all completely untrue. So it's good to be skeptical. It's good to do your research, but don't go crazy. Like someone asked me yesterday, what do I think of David Icke, or Ix, or I don't even know what his name is. The guy believes lizards rule the earth. That seems pretty schizophrenic or something. And look, I don't think he should be banned from Twitter or YouTube or anything like that. Like, we do have freedom of speech, but for anybody following this guy religiously, he's done all sorts of anti-Semitic stuff that's crazy. He believes lizards rule the world. I don't know anything else about him, to be honest, so maybe some things he says are fine, but he just seems like a crazy person or just trying to get attention or something like that. But I do think it's an interesting thing to be, to have the mindset of a conspiracy theorist, to always look at everything and be a little skeptical. Not mean skeptical, but a little skeptical. So if you ask, let's say you go out on, let's say you meet your girlfriend and you didn't see her last night, and you ask her, where'd you go last night? And she said, oh, I was out with friends. Notice she didn't answer your question. Or I could do it the other way. Let's say your husband comes home from hanging out or whatever, and you say, oh, where'd you go? And the husband says, oh, I was hanging out with friends. Notice he didn't tell you where he went. So that's a good way. Then your conspiracy muscle can click in. If they don't answer your question, maybe there's a reason why they didn't answer your question specifically. Why didn't he say, oh, I was hanging out with my friends at the bowling alley? Why did he just say, oh, I was hanging out with my friends? Who knows? So it's healthy in sometimes. And here's the other thing. When you study conspiracies, you start to get a sense of how to make decisions, because everything in life has to, conspiracy comes from the word conspire. So when two things conspire, they're doing work together that helps each other. So a conspiracy is when there's some unknowns that are conspiring to make a situation happen. So for instance, if you have a business idea, a business itself is a conspiracy. If I want to start a business, many things have to conspire to help my business succeed. So what I do is, and I've talked about this in the past a little bit, I have this something called conspiracy numbers. So my very first business that was a success, nothing really had to conspire. So I made websites for Fortune 500 companies and for entertainment companies. But I didn't start the business until I had a profitable client already. So nothing had to conspire in order for it to work. But let's say I want to create a new Facebook. Well, a lot of things have to conspire. I have to build a website with as much functionality as Facebook. I have to somehow get the word out about my website. So now there's two big things that have to conspire for me to be successful. I have to, and then people have to spread the news of my new site virally. You know, a social network is only valuable if it spreads exponentially. So that's a huge thing. It's the chicken or the egg. It's the build it and they will come fallacy. So three huge things have to conspire in order for me to create a competitor to Facebook. So that's a bad decision. So the more things that have to conspire, that can help you make better decisions. The fewer things that have to conspire means you might have a good business idea on your hands. But it's the same thing with the conspiracy theory. So with 9/11, some people say, oh, Bush was in on it and the government was in on it. Thousands of people would have to know the secret. Thousands of people would have to conspire together to make that conspiracy work. So that's impossible. But what I just said about Professor Neil Ferguson, somebody was probably following him around, just the way the article was worded. They don't give any sources, but they list on April 21st, she visited his house. Her husband's friend said he might have had coronavirus. On March 17th, she visited his house. On the same day, he announced, if you're separated from your partner, you must not see them. So who was spying on him? Somebody had to. They didn't list any source else. Someone had to have been spying on him. There's no conspiracy numbers there. That almost certainly was some kind of conspiracy. Someone paid somebody to follow this guy to dig up dirt on him. Then you have to wonder, who was it? Was it the President of the United States? Was it the Prime Minister of the UK? All of those things are possible because they have fairly small conspiracy numbers. All Trump would have to do is say, hey, to the CIA, keep an eye on this guy, Neil Ferguson, because we're about to close down the world economy because of him. That's completely normal and possible the way the government works. So anyway, the point is, useful to practice being a conspiracy theorist, but be a rational conspiracy theorist. And the way you be a rational conspiracy theorist is you use this idea of conspiracy numbers. How many things, what is the number of things that have to conspire for this theory to be true? Now, you can use that same idea. Is this business idea good? Well, what are the number of things that have to conspire to make this business idea good? Is this relationship good? What are the number of things that have to conspire to make this a good relationship? So for instance, if you were born a religious, Jewish person, and the other person's born a religious Christian, well, there's a huge thing that has to conspire. Their religion, and then parents meeting, and then friends meeting, and then where do you go to church or synagogue, or how do you raise your kids? So now you have a conspiracy number of 6, and probably is not going to be a good relationship. Don't forget, everybody could be sexually attracted in the first few weeks, and they feel like, oh my gosh, this is the love of my life. I can't bear to spend 1 minute away from this person. But that's because, and this is related to what we've been talking about with dopamine. Dopamine, you could think of it as the I want more molecule. So when you're first meeting with somebody, you want more and more and more of them. But at some point, that plateaus. You don't really want more of them. And that's when people say, oh, what did I do? This relationship is no longer that interesting to me. And then you kind of have to move the relationship from the dopamine phase to the serotonin phase, where you feel, oh, I'm so grateful for this person in my life. I want to help this person have a better life. I appreciate everything he or she does for me. And that's the next phase. And then also you want to keep things exciting and interesting to keep the dopamine occasionally spiking. You can't abandon that forever, obviously. But so I've just combined conspiracy theories with business ideas, with relationships, with dopamine and serotonin and how they cycle through relationships. But honestly, the big idea of the moment so far is that the next time they want to do a quarantine, the government, instead of thinking, well, let's give $700 billion to small businesses, another $700 billion to workers, $50 billion to airlines that are going to go out of business anyway. Here's the smart, simple way to do it. $5 per TikTok video. So now they're going to get exercise, they're going to get creative, they're going to make a living while they're quarantined, and that's how we'll solve the next crisis. Global warming or murder hornets or whatever. By the way, these hornets, weren't they called Asian hornets or African hornets for a while? I feel like people thought that was racist, so now it's all just called murder hornets, which is so weird. Like, all right, they murder people. Why weren't they called by their real name? They were whatever their real name was. Everybody got so sensitive. The Chinese virus, it's not racist. It's like saying, oh, the American virus. You know, in 1968, in my lifetime, I was born in 1968. In 1968, this is a very important most people probably don't know this. There was a pandemic in the United States in 1968. It was called the Hong Kong flu. That's what the name of it was. And by the way, in 1957, there was the Asian flu. But in 1968 in particular, there was the Hong Kong flu. Woodstock, which had 1 million people at it, happened right in the middle of the Hong Kong flu. So it was the opposite of social distancing. Millions of people around the world died from the Hong Kong flu. It was a very contagious, very lethal flu. Over 100,000 people died in the U.S., and the U.S. only had 200 million people. So if you adjust by population, that's the equivalent of almost 150, 170,000 deaths in the U.S. died in 1968 from the Hong Kong flu. We didn't shut down the economy. It was barely in the news. The healthcare system didn't get overwhelmed. Now, you do, and it did affect, by the way, similar to this, it affected mostly people over the ages of 65. Now, maybe if they did do social distancing, it would have been less than 100,000 people. Maybe if they did wear masks, it would have been less than 100,000 people. Maybe if they quarantined people over age 65, it would have been less than 100,000 people. But still, they did not shut down the world economy, which, 30 or 40 million people, I think before this is over, it'll probably be more like 50 million people will be unemployed. And it's just sad. Like, some of these people will die. We're going to see a lot more blah, blah, blah. I've talked about this for forever. I'm going to get to some side hustles in a second, but I'm also going to answer some questions. Where can we get just accurate news? Really good question. I'm going to have some water first. So, I'll tell you where I don't think there's any legit place to get accurate news, but you sort of have to pick your spots. So I like a couple of email newsletters. I like a newsletter called Morning Brew. I like a newsletter called 1440. I like a newsletter called The Hustle. There's probably other newsletters that are good. I think listening to podcasts, you could sort of pick your spots. And again, don't just pick people who agree with you. I'll give you an example. I had because there was something else to do that moment. I had an argument on Facebook with somebody the other day, and we got into it. And this person, so in the United States, we use something called the Electoral College to elect the president. People think the United States is a democracy. It isn't. It's a republic. And what that means is in every state, we elect electors, and the electors then meet a month later and they elect the president of the United States. They vote for, and that's how you pick the president of the United States. There's like 530 electors, and they pick the president. And this person was saying we should get rid of the Electoral College and just let people be a pure democracy. And that's a reasonable stance. We've had the Electoral College since the Constitution, but recently, the election of 2000 and the election of 2016, the popular vote, it's the only two times in the past 100 years, the popular vote didn't pick the winner. The Electoral College picked the winner. And the reason is because states with smaller populations get more electors per million people than states like New York City or LA. So the Electoral College penalizes California and New York and Illinois, and it boosts up the influence of South Dakota, Delaware, Oklahoma, states with smaller populations. And is that fair or not? And so and it's important to understand, right now, if you got rid of the Electoral College, it can be argued that small states would have no influence at all, and that we would form an oligarchy controlled by essentially New York City and LA. And so that's kind of the bad stuff about the Electoral College. The good stuff about, the good stuff about getting rid of, that's the good thing about the Electoral College, is that it allows the smaller states and rural areas to have just as much influence as the bigger states. And I think that's reasonable, but you have to understand, it's also important to not just have an opinion. You have to understand the history of something. So why did the United States create the Electoral College? The United States created the Electoral College because in 1787, there was a big debate. And what was the debate? The biggest debate in the United States, in the beginnings of the United States? Should there be slavery or not? So the southern states wanted slavery, the northern states didn't. Now, the northern states had more people. So in order to compromise enough to pass the Constitution, they compromised by creating an electoral college to give the southern states with fewer people just equal influence on choosing the president of the United States. So the original reason for the Electoral College was 100% because of slavery. And now that reason has evolved to say, well, look, we need to give smaller states, more influence and so on. But it's helpful to remember the original reason. So I said to this guy, why do you want to get rid of the Electoral College? And he said, the Electoral College is the only way to get rid of the Republican Party. And I'm like, you know what? Whether or not I agree with you, your argument is the argument of a child. You're just saying the world isn't what I want, so I want to change a law that was created 240 years ago. Like, that argument doesn't work. So instead, why don't you argue it this way? And by the way, I'm in favor of keeping the Electoral College because I do think you should have the smaller states shouldn't be ignored. But I listed 10 arguments for this person to use against me that were stronger than his argument. So again, we've talked about this before. Before you argue with somebody, you should invert. You should try to argue. You should try to make their argument. You should try to argue their case even better than they can argue it. So, for instance, I pointed out that the original reason for the Electoral College is now gone, of course, because slavery doesn't exist anymore. I also pointed out that, because of the Electoral College, running for president is so expensive. Joe Biden and Donald Trump, they're going to have to campaign or run TV commercials in all 50 states. So it's very expensive. It takes $2 billion to win the presidency. So in England, it's so much cheaper because they use a parliamentary system. You run for essentially what would be considered Congress, and then the prime minister is selected by the leader of the political party that wins in the parliament. So it's much cheaper to run for prime minister in England. So it's very expensive to run with an electoral college, and maybe that gives too much influence to lobbyists or people who donate huge amounts of money to campaigns. So if you want to do campaign finance reform, rather than limiting the size of donations or whatever, instead get rid of the electoral college, and it'll cost $50 million to win an election, not $2 billion. So that's a strong argument that I had never even heard before. And I went on and on. But the whole point is, most people don't really have arguments or beliefs that can stand up in their opinions. But the way to improve your stance and your opinion and your philosophy is take the other side and see if you can argue it. For instance, I'm pro-choice. My business partner, and one of my closest friends for the past 21 years is pro-life. And we often discuss it. I am 100% pro-choice. He's religious Catholic. He's 100% pro-life. And we have never once had an argument. We have very interesting discussions about it. And again, I've done the exercise where I can argue, even though I disagree with it 100%, I can argue his side even better than him because he's only taking a religious viewpoint. I could take other viewpoints. So I could argue the pro-life side better than him, even though I'm pro-choice. I have to make sure, I can still argue it. But the one thing I will say about him and why we get along so well is I understand he was born into a religion that he really believes in, and this is important to him. But where he doesn't protest, he never argues with people, and what he does is he adopts. He has adopted children, so he puts his actions where his philosophies are. His wife provides free legal counseling for girls who are 16 years old and pregnant and don't know what to do. So, he follows his values by trying to do good deeds instead of just burning down abortion clinics or protesting or trolling on Twitter or whatever. If you have an opinion, there's a negative way to release your opinion. You could just vomit all over Twitter, or you could actually do things that help improve people's lives regardless of what your opinion is. And you always have that choice. So, for instance, I could be arguing all day long on Twitter about the virus, but the reality is, I think the economy should be reopened, but I really see the other side. Like, other people are scared. There is danger. There's articles every day popping up in the New York Times about Kawasaki disease and children. Even if their articles are fake, I could see why people are scared. I wouldn't want to get the virus, at least the severe version of it. I kind of want to get the mild version of it so I could be immune, and then I could just, spit on all the non-immunes because in our new 2-tier caste system. But anyway, I'm going to ask another question. Which business models are right going forward? What do you think the similarities are between opening in 1918 versus now? Well, don't forget, they didn't close in 1918. So, and we also were fighting World War I in 1918. You can argue the Spanish flu ended World War I because, killed 50 million people around the world. You didn't have anybody left to fight. So we opened, we opened up right after World War I, but we had so much, the U.S. at that point went from being not the largest. England was the largest economy. We passed England in World War I, and so we had the Roaring 20s after that. So there's a lot of differences between then and now. But business models now, absolutely. I mean, I talked yesterday. Start an online newsletter, and let's say you have an opinion. I'll just go directly with what I did. I didn't like writing. In 2015, I did not like writing about stocks. I used to write about stocks for like 10 years and investing and all that. I did not like writing about stocks. I like just telling my own stories and writing books. And I was kind of moving into I don't like to call it self-help category because I never give advice, but I kind of tell my own stories. But I was moving into a different category. I was not interested in investing anymore. But I still knew a lot. I know, for better or for worse, I have 25 years experience investing in every style of investing. Like, I've been to Berkshire Hathaway's annual meetings. I ran a hedge fund. I ran a fund of hedge funds. I wrote for the Wall Street Journal. I've written 5 or 6 books about investing. So I knew a lot, but I didn't want to write about investing in general. So I created a newsletter for investing. The business started and I hired analysts. I hired employees. The business started in February of 2015. By March of 2015, this is how the newsletter business is so great. March of 2015 had $1.5 million in revenues and was already profitable. 2017, I had $60 million in revenues, was very profitable. Revenues, that was the peak year, but still very profitable business. I'm not even really involved in it anymore. But there's a lot of great analysts and so on. And I'm involved in that. I look over all the investing picks. I come up with the ideas. So I'm involved to that extent. I'm heavily involved. But the newsletter business is a solid business. Now, I think I did it the wrong way. I partnered too much with a very aggressive marketing company. I probably regret it a little, but they're also very good people, but there's lots of ways to do things. If I was going to start an investing newsletter business right now, I would go to substack.com, substack.com, and in 5 minutes, you could set up your own 4-page newsletter connected directly to your bank account. So let's just brainstorm ideas you could write about. Someone says, Robin, does James always act like this? Yeah, I do, unfortunately. I was listening to one of these IG Lives. I should probably talk slower and blah, blah, blah. But I started this, if you were going to start an investment newsletter right now, come up with some ideas. I want to see some ideas here. What are some ideas for your newsletter? If you were to start a newsletter today, what would you write about? And so I'll keep coming up with ideas. Fantasy sports predictions, newsletter, side hustle a day newsletter. Every day you'll get a new side hustle that you could do to make extra money. A newsletter on tips for getting, finding your romantic partner, or election news. So what are the undercover election news? Not what you read in the newspaper, but for instance, on predicted.org, which is a betting site, I bet back in September that Pete Buttigieg was going to win the Iowa primary in February. The reason I bet on Pete Buttigieg is because I had a friend working on the campaign who said Pete Buttigieg, who I had barely even heard of at that time, Pete Buttigieg had by far the most employees on the ground in Iowa. And this person told me, historically, whoever has the most employees on the ground in Iowa wins the primary. So I bet big on Pete Buttigieg on predicted.org, and I won that bet. So imagine, I would subscribe to a newsletter with all this inside information about what's going on in the different campaigns. So that's an interesting newsletter. I once paid for a newsletter, how to deal with when a girlfriend or whatever cheats on you. I once, 15 years ago, I subscribed to a newsletter like that. So you can come up with newsletters of any topic. Anybody come up with any topics here? Come on, come up with topics. You've been exercising your idea muscle. Okay, here's another one. Every day, another 30-day book challenge. Every single day on my 4-page newsletter, I will send another idea for how to create a book in 30 days. I'll give you the outline, everything. Another one. Oh, okay. Here's an online newsletter. I will give you the best every week, the best cities in the country that I think the real estate's undervalued, and why, and how you can find the best deals in each. So I'll do one city each week. Kansas City is really undervalued. Their real estate market just crashed. The reasons don't make sense. And here are the specific sites and listings you can look at to see good house. So that's a newsletter that people might pay for. So I just listed a whole bunch of ideas. Anybody else? Home improvement tips for working at home. Great idea. And it's money related, because how to save $100,000 on maintenance fees when you move into your new home. Newsletter on music publishing shares. Great idea. So for instance, a friend of mine, Matt Smith, he runs an exchange called the Royalty Exchange. You could buy parts of the royalty streams of songs. And so maybe a newsletter that tells you which songs are undervalued right now. Like maybe Coolio's Gangster's Paradise has been going down for a long time, but maybe you get information, they're about to play Gangster's Paradise in the next Avengers movie. So I'll start buying up the royalty streams wherever I can find it of Coolio's Gangster's Paradise. So that would be a great newsletter. How to get on podcasts. That could be more an online course, how to get on podcasts. Or maybe each week, here's 3 podcasts that are looking for... Okay, so here's a newsletter. Every week I'd send you 3 podcasts that are looking for a specific type of guest and I'll make the introduction, and I list the qualifications of what they're looking for. If you meet those qualifications, I'll make an intro between you and the podcast. Great newsletter idea. So again, substack.com, and you create a newsletter, or use teachable.com or highbrow.com to create an online course. All of these things, and we've talked about them before. So I'm going to talk about some new, another side hustle or two, and then I'm going to answer questions again. By the way, did you see Elon Musk named his new kid? I guess Grimes came up with a name. The name is X space AE space A-12. And so the X is because it's an unknown variable. The AE is Elvish for love in Lord of the Rings. And the A-12 is apparently Grimes' favorite plane. So I don't know how that kid's going to feel when he is 4 or 5 years old or 8 years old and all the other kids are beating him up in the playground because he has a name XAE A-12. But I give them credit for the creativity. Let's look at a side hustle. By the way, side hustle, I've used 2 side hustles this morning. One I made, or I'm trying to make the money. The other, I actually use the services of the side hustle. So on lessonface.com, I signed up for my very first lesson for beatboxing. So they listed all these categories, like you could learn guitar, piano, singing, violin, but you can learn how to rap, but one of the categories was beatboxing. I always wanted to learn that. There was one guy who was like one of the best beatboxers in the United Kingdom, $25 a lesson. I signed up, did it on Zoom. I took a half-hour lesson on beatboxing. Don't ask me the site is lessonface.com. Don't ask me to beatbox yet, but I will within the next few weeks because I am going to practice every day, and my next lesson is on Saturday morning. I was excited. So he's making money with his side hustle. He never would have thought when he started beatboxing in his little town in North England or whatever that, he'd be selling for $25 a half hour beatboxing lessons. And my throat hurts a little right now. Like I gotta exercise these muscles. So, but then here's where I did apply. I mentioned this site yesterday, but I applied and I started working. I could make up to $200 on this one thing I'm working on right now. Crowdmed.com. Crowdmed, MED.com. Everybody right now on Twitter thinks they're an epidemiologist. Like, I don't even know when this lockdown's over, what are all the Twitter epidemiologists gonna do for a living? All they've been talking about is viral shedding and hormonal immunodeficiency and the RNA latches on to the RNA in these cytokines and blah blah blah. Suddenly everybody on Twitter became an epidemiologist. Well, I'm actually acting like a doctor. On crowdmed.com, people post their illnesses and you sign up as a medical detective and you could help diagnose. And it turns out there's research that crowdsourcing a medical diagnosis works better than a doctor's diagnosis, which is why you're always encouraged to get a second opinion. Now you get a second opinion from the crowd. So I signed up for this first one. This guy has been having stomach pain. He lists all the medications he's been taking. He lists when his symptoms come on, and boom, now I'm a medical detective. And I started off, I had to ask him some questions, like what's his diet like and what over-the-counter medications he takes. He only listed his prescription medications, but I'm on the case. That's my job right now, is to solve this guy's illness. I'm not just a doctor on Twitter anymore. I'm a medical detective on crowdmed.com. So I highly recommend. Someone should set up crowdlegal.com too. I don't know. I haven't even looked to see if that's a site, but that's a good idea for a site. Also, I'm going to give you this idea for free, which I think is a good idea. Someone should create an exchange between TikTok influencers and people who want to have more TikTok followers. So I can reach out to, or somebody who's using this exchange could potentially reach out to Charlie D'Amelio, who has 50 million TikTok followers, and say, what's your price for shouting out, James Altucher? And she could say, well, let me look at your stuff. Let me see if I like your account. And it's $5,000. And then you can make a decision. There's an exchange. So I haven't seen any exchange like this. There's another exchange, Cameo, where you can get all these D-list celebrities to do videos for you. Like if you're having an anniversary and I want Gilbert Gottfried to sing happy anniversary to in a video to my wife, I can use Cameo to hire Gilbert Gottfried or Kevin from The Office or all these sports athletes or whatever. And it's kind of scary to think how all these celebrities would do it for like $50 or $200. I don't think I would do that for $200, but sort of shows you how all that fame and it didn't really make any money, or they spent it, which I completely understand. I've gone broke so many times. Okay, what's a legit new quarantine side hustle? This is a great one. Doesn't work in New York City, but if you live in New Jersey, go to, or any suburban area, sniffspot.com. So everybody is trapped with their pets in their house, but the pets need to run around. So sniffspot.com, you rent out per dog your backyard per hour. So it could be like $5 per dog per hour in your backyard. And then everybody could bring their 20 dogs over, and now you're making $100 an hour in your backyard, and it's all over the US. So I typed in New York City into SniffSpot, and like here's a place right outside of New York. It's $7 per dog per hour on 1 acre, and it's in South Orange, New Jersey, and boom, that person is making money every single day on sniffspot.com, and it requires no work. Let's find another one, and I'm sure we'll find some good ones. I'm always looking at predicted.org. Oh, the other day, I've mentioned now two where you get paid for your opinions. Slicethepie.com and focusgroup.com. You fill out surveys, you look at websites, you get opinions. Here's another one. It's called usertesting.com. So you use a website and you get like 30 or 40 bucks an hour. And sometimes you get more money if they interview you about it. So that was another one. So here's what we do for food here. So since the lockdown, we haven't done grocery shopping and we haven't ordered delivery. But what we do is that we found someone who is a good cook, and she gives us a menu once a week, and we pick out what items that we want, and she cooks a week's worth of meals for us and our kids and so on. And it works out to be about the same. It's cheaper than if we had ordered delivery every night, and it works out to be about the same as if we did grocery shopping. But no one here, sorry Robin, no one here really knows how to cook. And so this woman cooks like 20 meals a week, sends them over once a week. I think tonight is the day she sends them over. We pick out a menu. It's all healthy choices. But we found her through a friend. I don't know. I looked. There's not. I don't know if there's an exchange like chefexchange.com where you could find some. Like, let's say I'm a vegan. I want a chef who's an expert vegan chef, and she's got good reviews. Kind of like an Uber of chefs. There is a site called thumbtack.com where you can find chefs. And so if you search for chefs on Thumbtack, which I did do, there's a whole bunch of chefs that come up and they tell you it's $20 per person per meal and whatever, and they list their prices. So if you're a chef, or if you want to be a chef, or if you're studying being a chef, this is a great side hustle to make some money. So we talked about thumbtack.com, sniffspot.com. We talked a little bit more about substack.com, which is the newsletter company. I realized I forgot to give the mini copywriting class, which is like a perfect way to make money from home, but I will talk about that tomorrow. Meanwhile, the bullshit headline of the day, I already said, was 10 kids sick from weird Kawasaki virus, suspected linkage to coronavirus, which turned out to be BS. That was a BS hotline. 5,000 kids a year die from this horrible disease, Kawasaki disease. It has nothing to do with coronavirus, but they just got me to click. So the worst. That was the BS headline of the day. I turned to my all-time favorite website, which is, as you know, cosmopolitan.com. And I clicked on a headline. Cosmopolitan, if you want good, reliable information, it's always the truth. So Mark Consuelo used to be jealous of his wife, Kelly Ripa, and one time when they were married early on, he faked sending her a flower delivery. He was supposed to be out of town. He came into town a day early and pretended he was doing a flower delivery so she wouldn't be afraid to answer the door. And he barged right in and searched all over, and she wasn't cheating on him. So, but that is an article on cosmopolitan.com, extremely valuable. I read all the articles on cosmopolitan.com every day, very important. And I'm never going to stop reading it. You know, one time I visited, I might have mentioned this, I visited Hearst. Hearst was really interested in Bitcoin a few years ago. And so the CEO of Hearst, the president of Hearst, the editor-in-chief of Hearst, they all wanted me to write for Hearst magazines. And they said, we'll give you a column in any magazine you want. And they assumed I would say Esquire or Men's Health. But I said Cosmopolitan. So the next meeting was all the editors of Cosmopolitan, and but it turned out they were just writing down all my ideas, and they started writing all these articles, which is fine. I was happy to give them article ideas. Sometimes they would quote me, but I never quite got a column going at Cosmopolitan, unfortunately. So, but it's still my favorite go-to website for the truth. So, other things in the news. We talked conspiracy theories. We talked all sorts of stuff. But I don't know. Let me answer some questions. When is everyone going back to work? We all kind of know that. 29 states. First off, some of you are never going back to work. And I hate to say that, but there's 15 million restaurant jobs. 60% of restaurants, at least half of restaurants, are going out of business after this. Because I just see it in New York City. So it's not even an opinion. I see all the restaurants going out of business in New York City. My guess is 5 to 8 million people will be out of jobs in just the restaurant industry. And again, the tourism industry, that's out of business. The clothing industry, more and more clothing stores going out of business. Even gyms, Gold's Gym just declared bankruptcy. Doesn't mean they're out of business when they declare bankruptcy, but it doesn't mean they're necessarily bringing all the jobs back. So that's the critical thing. But 28 states are opening up this week. So there's going to be a lot of people starting to go back to work. But I don't know if some people are going to be excited to go back outside. But I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday, and he was from Arizona. And he said, well, in Arizona, they're barely even aware that there's a shutdown because they get the groceries from Walmart. That was open. Restaurants have all been doing takeout and delivery. So it hasn't been that, and there's hardly any cases in Arizona compared to the population. So he thinks Arizona will be seamless. But New York City, I don't know anybody who's going to go immediately back to restaurants or theaters or, who's going to be, you're not even going to go to birthday parties anymore because who's going to be blowing out birthday cakes? I feel bad for little kids. Who is going to blow out the candles at a birthday? And you get all these coronavirus germs all over the birthday cake. So that is done. Handshakes are done. Birthday cakes are done. Maybe even flower deliveries are done. So Mark Consuelo can't pull that trick again. But it does seem that by the end of this month, almost every state will be back to work. I don't know what restaurants are going to do if they're only allowed 25% capacity. I think people are going to ignore that rule. And you know what? When the government has so many rules, it's not so much, hey, the government shouldn't make these rules. We should have common sense. So yeah, don't go to a situation where people are coughing on you or the air is stale. Better to go to an outdoor restaurant than an indoor restaurant. But use common sense. The idea that we've completely outsourced our decision-making to the government is kind of scary. Are you all that, I don't know about you, but are people that stupid that they really need the government to tell them everything they need to do? The government's the same entity that runs the post office. The post office is about to go bankrupt. Federal Express is flourishing. The post office bankrupt. So why are you letting the government, the same entity that runs the post office, the same entity that runs Congress, the same entity that goes to war in Iraq, why are you letting them decide what you're allowed to wear, where you're allowed to walk, when you're allowed to leave your house? And then they base that decision on this professor in England who was not even following his own advice when he was helping some woman cheat on her husband who had coronavirus. So don't be stupid. You're going to make the best decisions when you don't outsource, don't outsource all your life to the government. Like, that's the only thing I'm against. Do what you want. Shut down, don't shut down, whatever. But don't be, and some people say, oh no, but I have to go to work if work's open. No, I've given you 15 side hustles in the past few days. There's lots of ways to make money. And maybe it's a transition, but you can transition to thousands of side hustles or online newsletters or online courses or whatever. We talked about being how to turn a virtual assistant position into a whole social media agency. So there's ways to take a small side hustle and make it into a big side hustle. There's ways to get ideas. Once I start doing crowdmed.com like this, I'll come up with more ideas. Maybe it'll give me ideas for a company to start. It's not that cheap. It's not that expensive to start a company because you could do experiments on the ideas, which I can discuss further. All right, so I think my hour is almost up. I have a bunch of questions still to answer. What was the name of the molecule book? The Molecule of More. It's a great book about dopamine and serotonin. What do you think of Mark Cuban for president? I would vote for Mark Cuban for president. I do think, he's talking about doing a New Deal, kind of like FDR. I think this is an interesting topic because the New Deal didn't quite work for getting us out of the Depression, but there's reasons for that. So we discussed that a little on my podcast, but I have some thoughts of that. But I do think it's worth thinking, what does America 2.0 look like? Like, what if you were to just reconceive even of the Constitution, what does that look like? There's a bunch of more questions about newsletters. I'll answer that next time, and with copywriting. When is the deadline for your books challenge? Let's make it the end of the month, and I'll summarize it again tomorrow. Meanwhile, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this live on my IG stories, and then it's going to go up on YouTube. If you have any feedback for me, you can email me at altucher@gmail.com, or you could send me a message on Instagram. Follow me on Instagram so you can see these IG lives, or you could send me a message on Twitter. I'm not I don't benefit from this at all. I'm not making any money, obviously. I benefit because I like doing this and sharing information that I've researched over the past, billion years and telling stories and so on. I could even tell you a story why I had to sign up for a newsletter about what to do when your significant other cheats on you. And I have all sorts of fun little stories for kids to talk about. So tomorrow, I promise, copywriting. But I think really interesting in this hour was the stuff on conspiracies, the stuff on newsletters, and more on side hustles, and I don't know, whatever else I blabbered about. You can also tweet me questions too. Tweet it on Twitter. Tomorrow I'll be back 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. 1 minute, 58 seconds remaining. I hope you enjoy it, and see you tomorrow, 2 p.m.